Welcome to the Black Marriage and Family Therapy Matters podcast, where we connect Black families to Black therapists. On Mondays, you will receive direct therapeutic support from a licensed therapist or professional connected to the mental health field. They will provide therapeutic and educational resources to help you have a healthier relationship with your family members. On Wednesdays, you will receive direct tips and resources to help you get through the stuck places that prevent many people from having the relationships with their families and significant others that they desire. On Fridays, we want you to visit our blog, which can be found at www.blackmftmatters.com, which holds additional resources and action steps that you can begin implementing immediately to improve your relationships. This is necessary because we love that you are listening, but we want you to take action too. While you are there, please grab our A to Z Relationship Bootcamp and be provided with the skills you need to immediately communicate better within your relationships. Please note that while the therapists on podcasts are therapists, they do not serve as your therapist unless you have signed a confidential agreement with them confirming that relationship. Thank you in advance for listening, and we hope you are inspired. All right, it's time for the show. Here is your host, Dr. Connie Omari.
Hey, and welcome to the Black Marriage and Family Therapy Matters podcast, where we connect Black families to Black therapists. Today's therapist is Dr. Megan. Hi, Dr. Megan.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great.
Awesome. Well, let's tell the guest a little bit about you before we get started. Is that okay?
That is absolutely okay.
Awesome. All right. A native of Kansas City, Kansas, Dr. Megan studied psychology and sociology at the University of Missouri of Kansas City. After earning her bachelor's degree, she went on to earn a master's in family therapy from Friends University in Wichita, Kansas, later studying clinical counseling and applied psychology at Dallas Baptist University. Upon entering her LPC license in Texas, she found her practice, the Volition Collective. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
The Volition Collective, which is formerly Family First Counseling in 2009. She prides herself on telling it like it is with her clients and motivating them to better their lives. As an LPC supervisor, she provides supervision and training for counseling students and interns new to the field. Dr. Megan is an engaging speaker, willing to be transparent about her own experiences in life and business. She has taken part as a panelist for professional associations, nonprofits, private events, and local churches, as she's an expert on relationships and mental health, internet radio, and television commentator, and a live streaming event expert. Dr. Megan presents seminars, workshops, and groups on various topics. Topics include personal growth, personality assessment, relationship restoration, divorce prevention, marriage enrichment, women's empowerment, boundary setting, depression, and the church. Her overall goal is stigma reduction related to mental health in the Black community, Black church, and the Black community overall. Dr. Megan is part of the Call to Action Mental Health, a powerhouse collaboration of Black women with intent on addressing mental health issues in the Black community. This is very impressive, Dr. Megan. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
You are welcome. You are so welcome. So out of what I've discussed so far, is there any one thing that really just stands out in the work that you do?
My work with my clients, I specialize in work with high achieving Black women. That was the focus of my dissertation. And so that stands out. High achieving Black women.
Oh, high achieving Black women. Oh, wow.
And of course that parameter was set by my study, but that's what my study was about. Okay. Because that's what most of my clientele is made up of.
Absolutely. So, well, is there anything interesting that your study found that might be useful? Bless you. That might be useful for our audience today? Because we do work with a lot of high achieving Black women, for sure.
Yes, I actually developed a framework to work with high achieving Black women that I am fleshing out from my dissertation study. But just to summarize the study, there are many things that people think high-achieving Black women need or that they have. Everything, under control, everything is perfect. But it turns out that the overall need of the women in my study was support. So different kinds of support. There was social support, therapeutic support, spiritual support, and emotional support. Oh, so wow. Despite and it didn't depend on how much money they made, because we had women in the study who made over $350,000 a year, and her need still was a man that could be supportive to her in those ways, and her family and her friends, just overall support from people, even though people think they didn't need it.
So it sounds like from society, we have built the Black woman up because we're so self-sufficient and so independent and so high achieving, that has in return, that's not in actuality. Even if those things are true, it doesn't mean that the average high achieving Black woman doesn't want to be supported.
Exactly. And that, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was quite interesting.
Okay, I bet that's an awesome study. Maybe have you had it published, or will you?
Yes, it's on ProQuest right now. Great. And I am planning on presenting it at 2 conferences, depending on if they select it. But like I said, I'm also fleshing out, what I wrote, so that I can do some other things with it and really use it.
Very good. Awesome. Well, today we're going to be talking about preventative mental health care. And that's so important because, as we were saying before the recording started, a lot of times people wait until they're in a crisis situation to start getting help. But it sounds like from what, you specialize in and what is important to you, there are some things that we can do before we're in a crisis situation. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what are some of those things? What are some things we can do?
I think, especially for couples, when a problem arises, well, I won't even say when, but well, yes. So like if for couples, my rule of thumb is kind of like, if you are consistently having disagreements over something, so it could be something as little as the discipline of the kids, or how often you're intimate, or who does what and pays what bills, like finances. As soon as that continues to be a topic of discussion that kind of can go south, or that you avoid talking about, I think that's when you step in to get help from a mental health professional. Because a lot of times with the couples that I see, the issues that they're dealing with currently are ongoing. They started, years ago. Not even just like months, but years ago, like even as long as 20 years ago. And so, by the time they come to us, they're saying, oh, this is the last ditch effort. If this doesn't work, we're, divorcing. All of those kind of words come up versus them, coming before it gets to become such a problem in their relationships. For individuals, the same thing. I think, especially if they are somebody who is isolated or does not have like a big support network, then I think preventative mental health care is important as well. And overall, for people, just as individuals and couples, I think a good rule of thumb is probably quarterly check-ins. And I know some people do yearly check-ins, but a lot can happen in a year. So
yes.
I think quarterly is a good amount of check-in time.
An example, thank you for that information, because I will randomly just ask, my husband, hey, you okay? Like, are you happy? Just random. Right. But I'm just curious, what would a check-in look like? Like, is that sufficient, or do I need to be asking more involved questioning?
No, that's a sufficient question, because that will point out if you move forward. So like, let's say in January, how everybody makes New Year's resolutions or goals or whatever they want to call them. So let's say that at least every January, you have set up an appointment with a mental health professional, and you kind of just check in with them, tell them how the previous time period went, because I'm recommending quarterly. So we'll say quarterly, but let's say you're just starting. And so you talk about how 2020 went for you. That's enough right there. I mean, 2020 was a pretty tumultuous year for quite a few people.
Yeah.
So you start off with that, and you know, there's nothing severe that you may need medication for or ongoing therapy. You're not in crisis mode or anything like that. You're just kind of checking in, making sure you're okay, discussing a couple of things that maybe happened in your job, in your life, blah, blah, blah. And that's the end of your check-in session. And so at the end of that session, you're saying to your mental health professional, okay, so I would like to reschedule for April. You know, I'm doing okay now. I don't have anything extreme going on, so I'll come back in April. And then you kind of do the same thing in April. But that could also go differently, where you come in January and you start naming a couple of things, and then you realize, I think I've been depressed. You know, 2020 was hard on me. I had to change jobs. You know, the kids were home. My husband and I saw each other all the time, so we're stressed out. Or my wife and I saw each other all the time, so we're stressed out. We haven't had time for us because the world has changed.
Right.
You know, you're homeschooling, doing all of those kind of, having all those kind of challenges. And so you find out, man, it's a little bit more involved than you thought it was. So that's when you go to maybe a regular schedule of, you know, like most of the clients, if they're not in crisis, but they have things that they're dealing with, then I'll go either a bi-weekly or tri-weekly session. So you might just do that for that quarter, though. So at the end of quarter one, let's say, when it's time for your technical April check-in, you're okay. And so then you go to the check-in schedule. Or you're not quite okay. You realize you want more, you know, you want to keep regular services, and you keep it your every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So that's how it would look to me.
I like that. And I thought what you were saying was you should check in for the marriage, but from your explanation, it sounds like you should just check in general, like asking.
Yeah, not just for marriages, but for like yourself. I mean, you could check in for parenting. People have challenges at work. I mean, and like I said, last year was extremely challenging. The way that the world operated for many of us changed. And so, you know, there are some therapists that were already online only, you know, but until, you know, and then the pandemic, so that was no adjustment for them. But for the majority of us, self included, I was used to being in my office and seeing clients in my office, and maybe seeing an online client here and there. So the transition was not easy for me.
Correct.
Even as a therapist. So.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So this probably goes into your dissertation. It definitely goes back through our history, but what types of, how do I want to ask this? What types of cultural things do you think we do that makes us overlook prevention strategies?
Well, of course, you know, when I talked about the destigmatizing of mental health care, a lot of what we do as a culture is through the church, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do absolutely believe in God. I absolutely believe that prayer works, but I also absolutely believe that counseling and all of that can be synonymous. And I think that is big.
Dead. Faith without works is dead.
Yes, exactly. And so I just feel like the kind of myth of that those have to be separate kind of needs to be removed. And because of that, I have churches and pastors that I partner with to educate them about mental health, because the good thing is, well, the good and bad, because some of the reasons that they're being more aware is because their people are struggling. But the good thing is, the good thing is that because some of the churches and ministers are more aware of the needs of their congregation as it relates to mental health, I've had quite a few collaborations with local churches on educating about mental health. And kind of my pastor and I specifically have talked to groups about, to the congregation about how, some things are spiritual issues and some things are mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And that, we each have expertise in those areas, and that's how you utilize us, figure out how to utilize us. So, yeah.
I like that because I think what happens, what I see a lot of is us completely separating the two.
Yes.
There's a place for that, but there's a tough reality that in the Black community, there's still a huge reliance on the church and the pastor. We can't completely ostracize that value, because when we do that, then we're missing out on a lot of people. So I can imagine it will be great when Pastor Johnson, Pastor Johnson, but says, what, this is a little bit out of my expertise. What about referring you to Dr. Megan, right? Mm-hmm. And that person now sees you as an authority because their pastor, who they value and respect, has made
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. And then also being active in the community is also a plus, because when you're active in the community, then people tend to see you at local events, and then they kind of find out who you are. Because I want to say that the first pastor I worked with saw me, doing something free at a health fair or something like that. And so that's how that evolved. And so even some of the churches, my previous church that I went to, which was like not into mental health, mm-hmm. they're now having like regular health fairs that I do every year, and just different things like that. So it's really expanded, and so people are understanding the importance of it. And I tell people, I am not trying to replace God or prayer in any way. I am an instrument of God. He created me to do this, and so mm-hmm. that's why I'm good at what I do, because it's my spiritual gift. It's what He made me to do. So
absolutely. The Bible says your gifts will make room for you. So good job. And I want to, what about, because we've been through such a tough history, and we're resilient, and like you said, you work with high achieving Black women, so they've gone through some stuff. So what part of that might make people think you have to deal with stuff like longer than they should? And I say this because in my course I was working with women. I work with women who are to help them learn to break the patterns of toxic relationships. And we were talking about domestic violence. And I just remember working with someone who was completely shocked by the fact that I was saying that you don't have to have, real toxic, that's not necessary. Mm-hmm. It never occurred to her that if a man hits you, that's not a sign of love. So my question is, and I know you see that, you've seen that before as well. So my question is, how do we get people to understand? And I from what I make sense of it is, we go through so much, we almost think that it's normal. And, so if we can get out of it, great. But what about the prevention piece? Like what do you think about, how can we, teach men and women that domestic violence is not okay? It's easier to not have a violent relationship than it is to have a violent relationship and figure out how to unlearn those patterns and behaviors.
Well, I believe a lot of that starts with just our views on relationship and how we even talk about relationships. Because I know you've seen couples who may have been together for however long, mm-hmm. but they don't really know anything about each other, and they didn't discuss anything before the marriage. So they didn't talk about, even without a formal premarital counseling, which I recommend, but
absolutely
they don't talk about stuff and don't know things about each other. And so they may not know how conflict is handled in their family of origin. And so for the batterer, conflict is, physical or whatever. And for the non-batterer, they've never experienced it. And so they don't necessarily even know how to handle that or what it is. And then a lot of what people leave out, which was also the focus of my study, is emotional abuse. And how that starts and often leads to physical abuse. I think it's pretty rare. I don't have the statistics on it, but I think it's pretty rare for somebody to just wake up and hit you. I think that started before that. They're testing seeing how they can talk to you and what they can get away with and things like that. So there's like almost a grooming period for that. And so just recognizing that that's even inappropriate. So like, somebody calls you a B word because they're upset because you didn't cook the chicken the way they wanted to. Right. And you just take that and say, that's just how he is. He's just having a bad day.
Right.
He's just having a bad day, and make an excuse for it. Then you've already kind of let a line be crossed. And so I'm always saying to people, like I said, I talk about boundary setting. And so boundary setting for some people, it hasn't gone on for a long while, so they may have this big pile of things that they need to have a boundary set on, and they don't even know where to start. And so I always say, start with one thing. So what is that one thing, the first thing you're going to tackle? So if it's, cursing you out for cooking the food the way they don't want it, then it's like, okay, so that happens, and you say, I'm working hard to cook for you, and I just don't appreciate being spoken to that way. And so from now on, if that happens, I won't be cooking, or, something to that effect. So whatever that boundary is. And of course, that's with the knowledge that one has to be careful, especially depending upon the level of battery in the relationship, because it could escalate things, which in that case, you set up a safety plan and you find somewhere else to be. Because I think if it's physical, being in the same environment is not helpful anyway, or safe. And so, anything depending upon the level of violence that's within the battery could send them over the top. So
that's correct. That is correct. You mentioned something I thought was very important, and I wanted to ask the opposite, and that is, people don't talk, so sometimes they don't know. What about, I think this is equally, if not more so, challenging. What about when they do know? Because I've seen people, for instance, marry a man, and forgive me, but maybe this man's not very involved in these kids' lives. They know that the man is not involved in their children's lives, and then they turn around and have a baby with this man, and then he's not involved in those kids' lives. And so it's kind of like, it always amazes me that people are shocked. So how can we be more in tune with I call it being in tune with your senses. I don't know what you say, but my Angelou said it best: when a person teaches you who they are, believe them. So how do we kind of, even if we don't have a formal conversation about something, how do we know, how can we be more aware? How can we prevent some bad things from happening if we pay more attention before things happen?
I consistently say to be mindful of the compromises that you accept at the beginning of the relationship. I think that's where that starts. So in the example that you used, if somebody were to want to date and say, oh, but I don't see my child because the mother, I'll use like a man as an example just because I'm a woman. Right. The mother does not let me see my child because, she's a B, or we don't get along, or whatever laundry list of things. So my first question is going to be, well, what about your parental rights? Have you sought parental rights? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, I'm not doing that. Or, oh, yes, I have. So, oh, yes, I have is a different path. Oh, yes, I have, and I'm actively working on it. Is you were actively working on it, and so I can deal with that. Right. But, oh, no, I haven't because of whatever laundry list of things. We're not going to move forward because that's not a compromise that I can accept long term. So, year one, it's kind of like, okay, have you worked on seeing your child? Have you worked on seeing your child? Year 3, it still hasn't happened. And definitely by then you would be aware that there's really no effort, being made.
Absolutely.
And so it just, that type of thing just builds and builds. So, when we talked earlier about people not talking, then it's like, okay, year 20, you have never had a relationship with this child, and now they're popping up, or whatever. And, this is a problem in our relationship, or it's a problem with how I can respect you in our relationship because you've never done what you were supposed to do. So it's the little small things like that, which I don't even consider that super small, but those things like that just build up and cause problems in the relationship. And so I think that it starts at what you accept at the beginning. And I come up with that from my client experience and my personal experience and some of the things that I allowed before I was married. And, that ultimately really ended my marriage. And when you're talking to people, you find out that most of the things they do were already happening either before or at the beginning of the relationship.
Thank you for that transparency. I as well, I think the human part of us is that this happens, right? Even to the best, most educated and knowledgeable about this. What would you say? My theory on a lot of this, because this is happening a lot, especially amongst our community and our people, and this is a main reason why I created this podcast and this platform. What would you say about how our history has desensitized us to stuff? Because if you think about it, slavery was all about, you think of the Black family, we couldn't legally marry, breeding. They had sex farms. We'd have to make babies so that they could have slaves. They could rape us. Our husbands and fathers couldn't do anything. You could find yourself having sex with your own sibling to make a baby, for the sake of the master. So there are a lot of, situations in our Black community, in our history, have kind of just, I think we've blurred the boundaries in terms of relationships because of it, made us less, family oriented. And I think it's a couple, 100 years later, but when those, you're really talking about like our great grandparents. That's not that long ago. So, how do we, I guess what I'm trying to say is how, coming from that history and being where we are today, how do you think that experience has made us kind of like turn the blind eye to certain things? Like for the slaves whose wife was getting raped by the master, like that was survival. Like he could not confront that master.
Right.
Or he'd die and then there'll be nobody. So is that kind of what we're doing today when we're like ignoring or overlooking, or maybe that's an extreme comparison, but
no, I got what you're saying. I definitely believe that it spills over and it does affect us. Of course, we know systemic racism affects us ongoing, but also I think that we have to get to the point as a people where we don't believe the hype. And when I say that, I mean that we don't believe what they tell us about us. We believe what we know about us, and we determine what is us.
You just spoke to my soul right there, because people will constantly try to define you. See that in the news and the media all the time. Education system, and it's like, no, we don't have to tolerate these thought processes.
And we have proven experiences where we survived quite well on our own.
Hello.
Like when you were talking about in terms of slavery. So, just think about it. Okay, I'm going to give you the scraps, the worst part of the food. I'm going to give you what I think you can't survive off of. And then there you go, there's soul food. So much so that now you're walking down from the plantation trying to get what I'm cooking. The scraps you gave me. So we are we are resilient. Like, we are smart. You think about Oklahoma and Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street was thriving. Okay. You tell us we can only be here and that, we can't use any of your resources. And so what do? We build an empire. And the only thing that happened to that empire is that you tore it down because you saw we were too good.
Absolutely.
And so, but those are instances of where we know that we're resilient, we're strong, and we can build. But that does not mean that we should have to be strong all the time. And so that's where we come in. You have a support network, you have an objective ear, because we all have support. Well, I won't say we all, but most people have some kind of support network within their families or their friendships. And so with all of that being said, however, it's your family and your friendships. And so they love you. And some might tell you, the truth, but then some may not. They might not, just because they love you and they don't want to cause problems in the relationship or whatever it is. So that's where that objective ear that we have comes in.
Can you give maybe just one example of what that looks like? Because I think people, and I think this is people in general, not just our community, but when a person's in we have a death in my family right now. It's close enough that it bothers me, but it's not real, sensitive. So
yeah.
I can work through it. But I remember their poor children, that is a lot closer on their heart. And I just remember, my family was going to be supportive. And when one of the children began crying, a family member, gosh, I hope they don't listen to this, but they kind of walked away, you know what I mean? Because I would assume it made my family member feel uncomfortable to It's the crying. But as you can imagine, losing a parent is very normal and expected that you would cry. So
exactly.
So I think we get I'm sure my family member intended to be supportive, that was the goal. That's why they showed up, but they essentially were not very supportive. So how can we support people? I mean, the death, rape, loss of a job, loneliness, whatever a person's going through. What's one quick skill you can share that will help us know how to give that support?
You mean as a layperson?
As a layperson, yeah. Just something
simple. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely say that the very first step would be, do you want me to listen, or do you want me to listen for a solution? Because I think that's where couples definitely can go south. It's I want to talk to you about ABCD, and then the other person is consistently trying to solve the problem, and the person that's talking doesn't feel heard. So I think that's the very basic beginning. And so then the second would be to do either one of those things. And so I think as a layperson, non-professional, that if you're talking to your friend and they start telling you something like, oh, I haven't gotten out of bed this whole week. I called into work because I just didn't feel like it. I think the average person knows that might not be normal functioning. And so they may say to their friend or loved one, you may need to talk to somebody else, besides me. And for some of us, that could, that next step may be talk to the pastor or whatever. And so then, but the pastor says, hey, this is not necessarily a spiritual issue. You're not functioning. You're not, doing just basic needs. So maybe you need to talk to a mental health professional. Mm-hmm. So even if that step goes from family member to professional, or family member to pastor to professional, I think that, the average person, and I think that's where our job comes in as far as doing community events and doing any kind of education and things like your podcast, is that we're giving that basic education so people know what that looks like. Or at least know to follow their instincts on, okay, I'm not sure that, this person is okay. Mm-hmm. And so let me refer them to a professional.
All right. What are 3 or even 1? Do you have any resources in mind, however many you want to offer, that could help Black communities maybe learn prevention skills, or go, if they find themselves at the beginning of this stage, what resource would you encourage the Black community to kind of tap into?
Well, of course, local professionals that you may trust, or speaking to your friends about, professionals that they trust, so that you can get basic information. I think for us as mental health professionals, that means we provide that to the community. We post it on our websites, there's blogs, just different things, there could be a blog on how to recognize if it's depression and you need to go see a professional, or if it's just a rough patch kind of thing. So, think that would be, I think, the avenue in which to educate people, in general. And then, of course, bibliotherapy is always good. So, even if the healing starts with, I'm going to get this book about what abuse is, because sometimes when you're reading things in black and white on a page, it makes it a lot easier to recognize. And I say that specifically with emotional abuse, because if you've been with an emotional abuser, then they're constant picking at you, or their advice, or like I call it different things, but like when I'm saying advice, I'm kind of like, oh, don't wear orange, you look awful in orange. You look better in, say, purple or whatever. So those kind of backhanded compliments, which in itself is not a problem, but if you're getting that all day, every day, and that is affecting your self-esteem, or the way you look at yourself, the way you look at your partner, your relationship over a long term, then it's kind of like, maybe I need, some kind of help or something. Like, I don't think this is normal. And so, like you talked about earlier, some of the dysfunction and inappropriate relationships, physical abuse, some of that stuff has become so normal, and I've even had clients that will say, well, it only happens when he,
right,
when it's the anniversary of his mom's death, or the anniversary of her child's death, or whatever. Like, and so it's on, it's like once or twice a year, it's okay. And so because it's so spread out, it seems to be harder to identify for people, and they don't think it's a problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate that. Can you give us one myth that the Black community might have about their ability to prevent their mental health crises?
I think I'll go back to what we said earlier, the belief that religion and counseling can't take place at the same time.
I love it.
I think that is one of the things that has crippled us throughout time, and it really, the thing is that people don't know, probably you and I know, is that it works really well together. Actually.
Great. Great. It's my favorite. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, well, you've given us a lot to think about today. We're going to transition to a part of the show that we call What's Good. And What's Good is just a space where I give a hypothetical situation and you kind of give us advice to help us work our way through it. Is that okay? Okay. Joyce, I'd like you to meet Dr. Megan. I'd like you... What, I messed your name up. Dr. Megan, I'd like you to meet Joyce. Joyce is a 47-year-old African-American mother of 2. She has been married 3 times, and she is engaged to marry her 4th husband. Husband number 1 was unfaithful to her. Husband number 2 had a gambling addiction, and husband number 3 used to beat her. She is ready for love and wants to have a strong marriage, but she is afraid of this happening again. Her exact statement was, hopefully this husband will be good to me. How can you advise her to tap into her own sense of self and be aware of things that she could prevent in proceeding with this marriage?
Ooh. Joyce has got a lot going on.
Yes, she does.
The first thing I would want to know from Joyce is, did she have any kind of counseling or healing from the previous relationships? Like, what is the distance between this last marriage where she was battered to this new marriage? Like, what work had she done on herself? So that would be my first question. My second question would be, how long has she known this person? And I would definitely, thirdly, recommend premarital counseling. I would equip her with the information, like the signs of battery or possible batterers. So, and that starts with that emotional abuse, how does he talk to you? All of those kinds of things. Is he open to premarital counseling? So that's where I would start with Joyce. I would hopefully be able to dissuade her from jumping right into another relationship until some of those steps are taken. Because it seems like from what you said that she like progressively made worse choices, you know. And so I would definitely want to know her relationship history and the distance between those relationships and of that, but specifically that last one where she was actually battered. Because, you know, the tendency, and we know that, is that, you know, people are drawn to the same kind of people and they just pick a different partner, but they may not know it. And so sometimes with those signs ahead of time, she might know it. And so that might be the like I said, the equipping her with knowing about emotional abuse and knowing that can very likely lead to physical.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, you have been such a source of inspiration for us today. We are so grateful to have you here. Dr. Megan, can you tell us, our audience, well, first of all, if you tell us the title, I'll make sure that I attach that in the show notes of your dissertation. What is the title of your dissertation?
It is super long.
Okay.
It's the impacts of the strategic family therapy intervention of seeding ideas on the relationships of high-achieving Black women in emotionally abusive relationships.
Wow, that is long, but interesting nonetheless. Interesting.
Yes, my chair, she was like, you need all of that in there.
All of it.
So I was like, okay.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we'll attach that in the show notes, or you can send it to me. That might make it a little bit easier for me to find. And where can, so are you still doing online counseling? I
am actually moving towards doing some face-to-face in July.
Okay.
I'm going to be very selective because in Texas, people think that COVID is cured.
Right.
Not.
Yeah. So you're in Texas. So as of now, anybody in the state of Texas who is listening to this podcast can assess you via online.
Yes.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. Is there any where else listeners can follow you? Instagram, Facebook?
So our website is thevococo.com. So THEV as in Victor, OCOCO.com. That's our website, and it is also our social media handle on all platforms. So it's at the Vococo. And so that's where they can find us and find, updates about the practice and what's going on. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, which I just opened Twitter. Not much on Twitter, but on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm not a Twitterer either, or a tweeter, whatever they call them. I really take it seriously with Trump, but that's a whole nother episode.
Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely another episode.
Another episode for another day. But this episode was great. We are so honored that you stopped by. Thank you so much, and I wish you nothing but success in your practice.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
You too.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Black Marriage and Family Therapy Matters podcast, where we connect Black families to Black therapists. Since you've listened all the way through, come on in and join the family. If you haven't done so yet, please join our free community where we offer weekly trainings and monthly giveaways. We can be found on Facebook under the Black Marriage and Families Matter Facebook group. And since you're serious about joining our family, we also invite you to join our All In campaign, which signifies your commitment to go all in, not only for yourself, but in helping us reach more people by downloading this podcast wherever you are listening to it, leaving us a review, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This really helps us reach more people and change more lives. After all, Dr. Martin Luther King once said, we can all get more done together than we can apart. With that said, I want to encourage you to share this episode with just 3 other people who you think might also benefit from our community and what we are offering, with the hopes that all of you can join our All In campaign. When you're done, simply click the link All In campaign in the bio and receive a free copy of my course entitled Goodbye Toxicity, which is valued at $297. This course will help you to work through some of the difficult experiences that arise in most of our relationships, and it's completely free to you with your commitment to join our All In campaign. We look forward to connecting with you every Monday and Wednesday. Thanks for listening.